Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us for ABC's Training Tuesdays, Techniques and Tools to Determine When to Start Irrigation. So good morning and welcome.
All right, thank you, Miranda. So I'm Ashley Correia. I am on the Field Outreach and Education team, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the Almond Irrigation Improvement Continuum on behalf of Tom Duvall. All right, so the Almond Irrigation Continuum is an improvement manual that does and talks about irrigation management and scheduling practices. It's 150 pages and it focuses on 5 irrigation practices and tracks 3 levels for improvement. And there's the front copy of what the continuum looks like. And also there is a link there that we could put in the chat box to give you access to the PDF version. So what is the continuum process and what does it look like? So these 3 individual key tactics equals the management of irrigation. So irrigation system, that's evaluating your irrigation system and resolving those issues that you find in the field. So this is ultimately maintaining the system that you currently have in your orchard. And water use. So water use is making irrigation schedules and measuring the applied water that you have added to your orchard for the year. And then also monitoring the effectiveness that you just did by completing your irrigation system and water use management practices. So these practices build on each other to inform management decisions when you are out in the orchard. So what is the pathway to almond irrigation improvement continuum? So this is a really cool sheet that's available, and we can also drop this into the chat box. This kind of gives you a high-level overview of what the irrigation continuum does and kind of gives it down and breaks it down level by level. So you have level 1, 2, and level 3. And in the moving slides, I will go ahead and break this down a little bit further. But this is a great one-pager to kind of give you an overview of what the continuum does for you guys and what benefits it has. And it's a nice little cheat sheet to have while you're out in the orchard. So moving through the continuum, what does the continuum do? What are the levels? And what does it mean to achieve these levels? So level 1 is the fundamental level. This is practices within reach of all of the California almond growers. So everyone should be able to reach the fundamental level, or level 1.0 of the irrigation continuum. And then moving on to level 2. So what does level 2 mean? That's the intermediate portion of the continuum. This is where it becomes more sophisticated in practices to attain more crop per drop. So essentially, you're combining level 1 and level 2 to reach the intermediate level. And finally, level 3.0 is the advanced level. This level is advanced practices to maximum crop per drop. So what does that what does that talk about, and how do you have to achieve that? The irrigation continuum will give you a nice, precise breakdown of each different level 1, 2, and 3, as you move through the 5 different irrigation practices that the continuum has to share. So evaluating the irrigation system performance. So this is the 1.0, there's 2.0 and 3.0. So this key here is the irrigation system. So it's going to tell you to evaluate your irrigation system performance. So you're going to record your pressure variation and calculate average application rates. And then when you move over to 2.0, you're going to measure distribution, uniformity, and average application rate by measuring water volume. And when you slide into number 3, you're going to measure distribution, uniformity, and average application rate by measuring water volume. So essentially, level number 3 in this step combines 1 and 2 to achieve number 3. And it tells you should be doing this every 3 years and then every 2 years, or as an issue arises in your system. So making sure when it's talking about evaluating your irrigation system performance, the Almond Board is partnered with local RCD districts, and also the Almond Board themselves are doing free irrigation system evaluations in almond orchards. So if you ever have any questions or something's not right in your irrigation system, give us a call or reach out to the field outreach at almondboard.com email address, and we'll be able to assist you and get you set up for a free irrigation system evaluation. So determining water use is another concept that the irrigation continuum covers. So in water use, you're going to determine orchard water requirement. So in step 1, that's a monthly task. So you're going to check the normal year regional ETC to estimate irrigation demand. And then in section 2 or level 2, you're going to adjust for current weather and crop cover use. And in step 3, you're going to use real-time ETC data to correct the schedule. So most of the time, growers use SEMA weather data stations or the online website or platforms to kind of track what the normal year and historical data is. So that's one way you can retrieve some of this information. Now moving to back into determine applied water and irrigation efficiency. So you're going to, in step 1.0, you're going to calculate multiplying application rate during an irrigation. And then moving to 2, you're going to measure with the flow meter. And 3, you're going to compare and adjust crop ETC to determine irrigation efficiency. So ET tells us how much water the plant uses, and applied water tells us how much water we are using. So this kind of is a good comparison because sometimes growers just add on extra water or are putting water down and they don't have an accurate depiction of what the tree is truly using. So this is going to help growers become a little bit more efficient when you're doing some scheduling and actually looking at the ETC and seeing what the tree is actually using comparatively to what you are applying. So monitoring soil and plant status. So monitoring soil moisture plant status is another great concept that will help growers understand what's truly going on out in the orchard. So the normal step 1.0 in the beginning is to auger 3 to 5 feet deep to evaluate soil moisture based on feel and appearance. And then 2.0 is use a manually operated soil moisture sensor 3 to 5 feet, and then also use an automated soil moisture sensors to store data over time. So as that step continues to go, I feel like the most important thing is when growers have questions, when we go out and meet with them and they're talking about their irrigation, we always bring out our soil probe and start going down into the soil and see what's actually happening and doing like the field test. A lot of that, going back to the basics, especially sometimes if you have a failed, soil moisture sensor or, something's not right and you're questioning what's going on, always go back to step 1 and actually auger down into the soil and see what's happening. And this will allow you to see truly, is the water, infiltrating into the soil? How far is it going, et cetera, based upon your irrigation scheduling. So now going into plant water status. This is one of my favorite things. I enjoy using the pressure chamber, but most, at the basic level at 1.0, you're going to look for visual plant cues. And then 2.0, you're going to look into using the pressure chamber at midday for stem water potential. And then in step 3, you're going to compare the readings to a baseline and decide when to start irrigating. So going back to the visual cues of 1.0, it's pretty simple to go out and look at a tree. I want to say most of the time growers use 1.0 all the time. They just don't realize, hey, they're already at the 1.0 of plant water status in the continuum. And my favorite thing is 2.0, using the pressure chamber. So this is an exciting feature that the Almond board has been working on and is going to be allowing our growers to check out pressure chambers from the organization once they have been fully trained. So you guys can actually use it, see how well it works in your orchard, and be able to monitor your stem water potential through the midday. And then 3.0 is just combining everything that you've done in the lower levels of 1 and 2, and you're going to actually, there's called the baseline method in the irrigation continuum, and it'll break that down and kind of give you it by weather and relative humidity, and that kind of gives you a basic of understanding of when do you start irrigating. That's a big question that most people ask, and this system and following the different levels and the irrigation continuum will help you get a better understanding when to start to irrigate in the beginning of the year. Now going into like management, and this is integrating irrigation water management practices, and this is talking about performance data with a normal year of ETC and specified water requirements and scheduling irrigations. So this is kind of looking at the management side of irrigation. And then in 1.0, you're going to adjust your schedule by checking soil moisture with an auger or visually monitoring plant status. And then in 2, you're going to use schedule data using current weather data, manually operating soil moisture sensors and pressure chambers for plant water status. And 3, you're going to adjust your schedule by using real-time ETC data, automated soil moisture sensor, and pressure chamber data that you've collected. So the important thing is just to kind of understand what's truly going out into the soil. What do you do? How do you do it? And this is going to give you an example of saying, hey, like we want you to use your schedule, and the schedule is great to have. It is a basic foundation, but at the same time, you still have to make adjustments to it because it's not a one-time or one thing fix all. It applies differently to each orchard that you have and management practices that you are currently doing. So it's important to adjust it at different degrees and levels that you see fit for your organization or your operation. And with that being said, I know Danielle is next, so we're going to go ahead and introduce him, and we'll take the questions at the end in the question and answering session. And now we're going to pass on over to Dr. Daniele Zaccaria, who is an associate with UC Davis.
Thank you, Miranda. I hope you guys can see my screen in the proper view. Can you confirm that you can see it? Okay, okay. Yes, my name is Daniele Zaccaria. I'm an agricultural water management specialist with UC A&R. I'm affiliated on the UC Davis campus. And I was asked today to give an introduction to the various methods and tools for irrigation scheduling. I'm happy that Miranda somehow touched upon different things that I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail today. So the objectives, my presentation during the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm gonna try to illustrate methods and tools for scheduling irrigation and discuss advantages and drawbacks of this each of these methods. And somehow at the end, if time allows, to try to indicate what are the relevant aspects for deciding when to start irrigation in almonds. And I'm laying the grounds for the following presentation by May, Culumber, and Khaled, Bali. Now, irrigation scheduling in summary provides answer to three main questions. The first one is when to irrigate our crops. And the normal answer that we all learn from books and from irrigation courses is that we should irrigate crops before the plants face water deficit. This is old school, but it's still valid for most of the crop where the production of biomass is important. For those crops like permanent crops and specialty crops where there are benefits of applying some regulated deficit irrigation, the correct answer to this question is that we should irrigate our crops a specific water stress level that are somehow beneficial for fruit yield and quality. The second question that we try to answer with irrigation scheduling is how much water we should apply. And the old school, the answer is that we should apply the amount of water that a crop has used for evapotranspiration, for the sum of evaporation and transpiration since the last irrigation or rainfall. But again, for specialty crop where there is a benefit in applying some relative deficit irrigation, regulated deficit irrigation, I think the correct answer is that we can also apply a portion of the maximum evapotranspiration of the crop that is necessary to maintain a certain target water stress level. Think about, for instance, almonds and pistachios, but also think about wine grapes where there is a benefit in applying some water deficit. The third question that we try to answer is how to best apply the necessary amount of water. And I think in this case, the correct answer is it could be different. So we can apply this water uniformly or site specifically. We can apply this water with frequent and light water application, irrigation, or with infrequent and deep, depending on the crop, depending on the type of system. And but also there's another type of answer that we can provide. So we should apply water with application rate and volumes that is compatible with the soil infiltration rate and with the water holding capacity. Or if we are in areas where we have some time of use for energy, also our way of applying water should be somehow in compliance with the energy rates in order to optimize the use of energy and minimize the energy cost. Now, I think there are three main methods for scheduling irrigation. The first one is based on weather parameters. The second one is based on the on soil characteristic, and the third one is what we call plant-based. The weather-based relies on utilize estimate of crop water use or evapotranspiration. Is very common, especially for field crops and for many other crops. And however, it requires some data and calculation. The soil-based rely on assessing the soil water status, and somehow relies on equipment that we have deployed in the field, so it's equipment intensive, and but it's also good for feedback, for periodic check and getting feedback after the irrigation event. The plant-based instead relies on detecting the plant water status. Somehow is labor intensive for the methods and technique that are mostly used in the field, which is pressure bombing or pressure chamber. And it's well developed for some specialty crop, but not for all. In any case, I think that all irrigation scheduling methods and tools require somehow skills on the farm labor side, and also the capacity for fast troubleshooting of the tools and of the irrigation system. Now, briefly, the weather or ET-based irrigation scheduling is based on the principle of replenishing into the soil the amount of water used by soil evaporation and crop transpiration since the last irrigation or rainfall. Now in California, we estimate the crop water use of crop evapotranspiration with the product of reference evapotranspiration, which is related to grass, and the crop coefficient. Here it's the equation that we normally use. So crop evapotranspiration is equal to reference evapotranspiration multiplied by crop coefficient. Now, in order to apply this principle, we can use historical ET average. It could be historical reference ET multiplied by crop coefficient, or we can use historical crop evapotranspiration, or we can use real-time reference evapotranspiration, but again, we need a reliable value of crop coefficient, or we can use also a forecast of reference evapotranspiration. Again, we need, in any case, to rely on accurate crop coefficient, which is crucial. Now, in real time, I'll focus mostly on the real time estimation of crop evapotranspiration. Here you got, again, the equation that I showed before, a reference ET, which is the amount of water used by a standard grass surface, can be obtained from the CIMIS network, the California Irrigation Management Information System, which is operated by the California Department of Water Resources and relies on a network of about 150 automated weather stations that are spread out throughout California. There's another product that is available through CIMIS, which is a spatial CIMIS, and somehow give you a spatially distributed estimate of reference evapotranspiration. Again, as I mentioned before, we need to rely on reliable, somehow dependable value of the crop coefficient, and this is a table that is reported on the manual of irrigation continuum for the Almond board, and here in the red area you find the monthly value of the crop coefficient. Now, if we multiply this monthly value of the crop coefficient by the somehow the reference ET of the different zones where almonds is normally grown, which is zone 12, zone 14, zone 15, and zone 16, we get here a sense of the amount of water that is necessary for matching evapotranspiration, and this is specifically relevant for scheduling irrigation and also for planning purposes. I mean, for planting new acreage and for estimating how much water we're going to need in the different areas. There's a new product that is available to growers and is made available by the National Weather Service called FRET, or Forecast ET, and provides a forecast of a 7-day forecast of reference evapotranspiration that you can use in order to do prospective irrigation scheduling. So at the end of this week, for instance, we can look at the forecast for the following 7 days and somehow obtain and estimate the amount of water that we need to apply to replace the forecast of crop evapotranspiration. This is available. Also, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is working on another type of reference ET forecast. The drawbacks of ET-based irrigation scheduling is that the estimate of crop evapotranspiration that we obtain by using generalized crop coefficient values might be somehow different from what you have in the site-specific condition of your orchard. And so we might run the risk of over-irrigation or under-irrigation. And most of the available crop coefficient information of the different crop in California was developed during the 80s and 90s. And for infrequent irrigation method, that means surface irrigation or sprinkler irrigation, and were developed for well-drained soil and somehow flat ground. And for a variety, rootstock, plant density, and canopy management practices, they're somehow were very different from what we apply now. And those cultivar rootstock and canopy management were conducive to much lower yield with respect to what we have. For this reason, the University of California is now reevaluating the crop coefficient values for the different production areas of California through a project funded by the Almond board. We have to consider that microirrigation is a game changer because it allows to spoon feed water and nutrient to crops. And so this is the reason why somehow we have to reevaluate the crop coefficient value. We're noticing that almond orchard grown in the northern Sacramento Valley have for sure different crop coefficient with respect to the San Joaquin Valley. And so looking only at evapotranspiration for fruit and nut crops like almonds or pistachio can be somehow limiting because we really need to look at the combination of also the plant and soil water status. The alternative to estimating ET is somehow scheduling irrigation on the basis of site-specific measurement of the actual ET, and this is much more reliable. The technology now is providing tools and methods that are available on the market. We have an example here of a Thule surface renewal commercial ET measurement station, the Allowable mark, and somehow for other field crops, we got other tools like the atmometers. So those are available on the market and allow growers to somehow schedule irrigation based on the actual measurement of site-specific evapotranspiration of your crop. The second method for scheduling irrigation is what we call soil moisture-based irrigation schedule, and is based on observing the soil moisture frequently or by monitoring the soil moisture in continuous. And we, based on the soil moisture, we should start irrigation at a certain target level of soil moisture, what we call management allowable depletion or management threshold or allowable negative tension. This is the threshold above which we should irrigate our crop in order to prevent any water deficit and any stress, water stress condition. This method also allows to stop irrigation when the soil moisture is brought back to a certain target level. Here is an example of the watermark. It's been used in California for the last 30 years, and this is an example, I think, of a pistachio orchard. We got watermarks at 3 different depths, at 12 inches and 24 and 48 inches. You get a sense of, the soil moisture tension, so the negative pressure at which water is available in the soil at a different depth. And this can guide somehow the timing and amount of irrigation application. Just a little bit more on soil moisture monitoring. This helps answering several questions. So when to start irrigation and when to stop it. And the other question is, has enough water infiltrated in the root zone during an irrigation event? And if we are applying sufficient or insufficient or excessive water to our crop and to our soil. And also, in addition, somehow growers need to know whether they are building a certain deep water storage in order to allow the plant not facing any water stress during the periods of non-irrigation. It could be a bud break or leaf out or during harvest operation in the field. As most of you know, soil moisture can be measured in terms of water content, and this could be percentage or inches of water per foot of soil or millimeter of water per meter of soil, and it gives you an idea of how much water is available per unit of soil. It can be measured in a percentage of weight, percentage of volume, but we normally, the most common and practical method is to measure it in terms of depth. So inches of water per foot of soil. Okay, and but also the soil moisture can be measured in terms of tension, and this is expressed in either centibars or kilopascal, and it tells you how strongly water is held by the soil and by the soil particle. So the higher the tension, I mean the lower is the centibar, the lower is the pressure in the soil. The drier is the soil, and the more difficult it is for plant to extract water. So this graph will show a little bit more detail, but I think May, Culumber, and Khaled will describe this in more detail. These are general values of soil moisture content on the left and soil moisture tension values where irrigation should start. And we are considering the threshold of 50% of plant available water. So at 50% of when 50% of the plant available water is being depleted by evaporation or transpiration, then we should start irrigating our crops in order to prevent any water stress. Now, there are a few drawbacks of soil moisture-based irrigation scheduling. This is an example of a well-watered pistachio orchard where the soil moisture tension never went below 40 kilopascal. And this is basically a well-water, but you can see also another well-water situation, again, where for most of the crop season, the soil moisture never went below 30, 35 to 40. Now, the difference between the two orchards is that the first orchard shows a very well-watered situation, but is somehow suffering a lot for, I would say, water excess. So one of the drawbacks is that plants and trees may face water stress even under well-watered soil conditions. And this might happen because of excess salinity or acidity that is creating deflocculation of the soil particle, and then you have hypoxia or anoxia, so excess water, basically, or when you have some perch water table, and when you apply water, the water piles up and somehow creates saturated soil conditions. There's another problem with micro-irrigation and soil moisture monitoring and soil moisture-based irrigation schedule. Here in the picture, you can see some preferential flow. So those are soil that are somehow homogeneous in the first foot or the first 2 feet, and then a deeper layer somehow has cracks, and those cracks create preferential soil water towards, water is moving vertically, but it doesn't wet homogeneously. So it really is really important where we place our soil moisture monitoring, because it can also give you false reading depending on the type of soil. So we have to be very cautious about irrigating only based on soil moisture monitoring. And anyway, soil moisture monitoring can be used very well as a feedback information after the is that we somehow need to look at the plant together with the soil in order to schedule irrigation, especially in crops. There are high value crops like almonds. So the methods to monitor plant water status are different. So we can have leaf or stem water potential, we can have sap flow, we can have canopy temperature, and a combination of the different method that I'm showing here. And here is a few picture of dendrometer in a pistachio orchard, and here is the detail at the center of a dendrometer, and here you have also the infrared thermometer and some other figures of leaf tensiometer or leaf pressure, leaf turgor pressure sensor. I think we'll talk about this in more detail. I would say that for routine irrigation scheduling, once the season has started, a combination of the different approach is probably the one preferable. And so we should use plant-based irrigation, plant-based monitoring in order to decide the proper irrigation timing. And then we should use the ET-based method in order to define the adequate amount of irrigation to apply, and somehow use the soil monitoring in order to get a feedback also of how the irrigation schedule was executed and if we applied sufficient amount of water. Of course, in this practice, the combination of the method, we can also use flow meter in order to make sure we apply sufficient amount of water according to what we schedule. Now, there are a few things that I want to finish with, I want to touch upon. So you can see here in this table, almond as probably is among the different tree crops, the one that has the lowest, among the lowest chill requirement, 8 to 13 days. So almond trees require very low chilling. And this means that the vegetative growth and the blooming begin much earlier in the season relative to other tree species. I think only parsimon has a lower chilling requirement than almonds. But anyway, blooming and the initial leaf development in California occur nearly simultaneously for almonds. And the maximum, oops, I'm sorry. I think I lost track. Let me see. All right. I was here. Can you see the slides still? Okay, so the maximum potential nut production is in California is determined around the period between late January and late March in this 2 months. And the early stage of fruit growth normally occurs at the same time as most of the leaf expansion and shoot growth in this about 2 months period. And this leads in almonds to somehow considerable competition for the tree resources, mainly the carbohydrates. There are several research findings that indicate the almond vegetative growth is very sensitive to and very directly affected by tree water deficit. So basically, this means that in this period between late January and late March, we should probably avoid any water stress, any water deficit, and any water excess. But in areas with substantial winter rainfall, these three processes they occur early in the season. So the leaf out, the blooming, pollination, and fruit set can be under non-limiting soil water conditions, and this is mostly valid for the northern part of California, but probably is not valid for the San Joaquin Valley. Now, here is a map of the average annual precipitation in California. I think is a 30-year average, and you can see the Sacramento Valley, where most of the almond production happens, as varies between, I would say, 20 to 30 inches of water up to basically 5 to 10. So we got different rainfall condition, but this is a very average situation. In reality, in the northern Sacramento Valley, if you can see here in this graph, the normal average, like 40-year average, is in terms of precipitation, is talking about 50 inches of water, and this includes rainfall and snow. But you can see here, look at the graph for 2019 and 2020 was almost half of the 30 years or 40-year average, and look at 2017, you got a lot more water. So the inter-annual variation of rainfall between one year and the previous are the following. In California, has an enormous swing. And so for the early stage of the almond production can be very variable. So growers can be with facing this period with a very dry soil or with a very wet soil. So to me, it's very important that soil moisture is monitored, somehow is checked periodically in order to decide when to start irrigation in this period, because again, it can vary. Similar things happen in the San Joaquin Valley, in the central part of the Sierra, and so you can have very variable conditions. Look at the 30-year average and look at the 2019, 2020, and look at 2016. So the swing, the fluctuation between the water supply is very pronounced from one year to the other. And the same happens in the southern San Joaquin Valley. You can have very different condition one year with respect to the previous. So with that, I will stop, and I will be not taking too much time, and I'll be staying over the course of this webinar for entertaining any question. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Daniel.
Okay, good morning. I'm the next speaker, and we're going to talk about a simple way to determine when to start the first irrigation. I'm Khaled, Bali Irrigation Water Management Specialist based at the UC Kearney Ag Center in Fresno County. And to determine when to start the first irrigation, we have to look at several factors. One of them, and we'll try to keep things simple here, we're not going to go into too much details, but there's a lot of details that goes into each factor. So the first one is soil type, which has an impact on soil water holding capacity that Daniele talked about, and other physical characteristics of the soil, for example, infiltration rate. Daniele mentioned variation in weather. Location will make a big difference. So if you're in Northern California, you have completely different weather conditions. The rainfall will be different. Evapotranspiration demand will be different from one location to another, depending on where your farm is located. Another factor that we have to consider is crop maturity. If you have relatively young trees, most likely, you're going to have a very shallow root zone versus mature trees where, you have developed root zones. Crop water demand will vary a lot also based on the maturity of the trees. Other factors that we have to consider sometimes, which are not very common, but for example, if you're doing groundwater recharge, for groundwater banking at your farm, that would be a factor. If you have availability of surface water and you do flood irrigation event during winter to refill the soil profile, that will make a big impact on deciding when to irrigate. So to start with soil type, typically we talk about soil texture. Soil texture is as simple as determining how much sand, silt, and clay that you have in the soil profile. So as you can see here, the sand particles are relatively large. And then when you look at silt, it's relatively smaller, much smaller than sand, and the clay is very tiny. So that will make a huge difference on the water holding capacity and infiltration characteristics of soil. So we can look at if you have a lot of clay in your soil, your water holding capacity would be relatively high. Infiltration rate will be relatively low. If you're looking at lighter soils, more sand and silt, you're going to have high infiltration rate, and the water holding capacity will be relatively low. So how can we determine soil texture? Well, let's take the easy approach, which is basically looking at soil maps. In the old days, we used to have books where you can look at the soil map in your area and determine the soil texture. Right now, there are so many resources available on the web, and this is one of them from the UC Davis, the Soil Web application. You can just go to your farm, click on the location, click on the farm that you have, and determine the soil texture. In this example here, so I have this field and I have 2 different soil types. So in this area, I have sandy loam, and in this area, I have fine sandy loam. So making irrigation decisions or deciding when to irrigate will depend on the soil type. So I may have 2 different decisions to make based on the soil type that I have here. Well, the best thing to do is, to go with a backhoe and be familiar with the soil type that you have. The soil survey web would give you an idea in general about the soil texture, the soil conditions in your farm. But the best thing is to do, to dig a profile and take a look at what's going on with the soil in your farm. You may have different soil types, and the soil texture will vary, within the soil profile. So that's really a good idea to get some samples, at least do the field method. So this is what we typically use, the soil texture triangle. And just to keep it simple, let's talk about water holding capacity. This is if you have anything that has clay in the description of your soil, most likely you're going to be here. And the water holding capacity would be relatively high. You may have issues with infiltration, during the irrigation events, but in terms of water holding capacity, it would be relatively high. If you have silt loam, sandy loam, you're going to have medium water holding capacity. If you have anything that has sandy in the soil description, most likely you have a lot of sand and silt in the soil, and the water holding capacity will be relatively low. Now, just to give you an idea, if we take a foot of the soil profile, Daniele already talked about this. Like, let's say if we take the top 1 foot of the soil profile, and somehow we can extract all the moisture out of it, by taking that 1 foot and putting it in the oven for like 24 hours at, high temperature. We may end up extracting 6 inches of water out of that foot of soil profile. That's basically what is called total soil water. Now, Daniele was talking about plant available water. A portion of that 6 inches is available to plant. And even not that entire amount is available to plant. When we talk about orchards, we have relatively, maybe 50 to 60% of the available water, plant available water, available for extraction by the plant. Now, one of the publications that Daniele shared with you is, for different soil textures, we can determine what's the plant available water. And in this example, I'm going to take a look at, assuming that I have a silty loam, based on this table shows me that for every foot of soil, I have 2 inches of water available to the plant. Okay, So now let's take a look at the root zone. If you look at orchards, most publications, they will say, okay, well, your root zone is about 8 feet or so. That's relatively accurate when we used to have flood irrigation systems, deep roots. Right now, with micro irrigation systems, with the drip irrigation systems, we're basically dealing with about 2 to 4 feet of the soil profile. We still consider anything before 4 feet, but in terms of making irrigation decisions, we're talking about the active root zone. So in this case, let's assume that the active root zone is 4 feet. So I can calculate how much available water in my root zone. So if I take the 2 inches here, multiply it by 4 feet, I will end up with 8 inches of plant available water. Now, the concept of management allowable depletion, MAD, is typically for orchards is anywhere from 50 to 65% based on Daniele's publication. But early on, you know, we don't want to exceed the 50% because the trees are sensitive, especially around this time of the year. So out of the 8 inches, only 50% of that is available to the trees. So I end up with 4 inches of plant available water. So about 4 inches of available for this soil type. Now the next step, I can determine the water balance. So like, let's say I want to go back to October when I had really good irrigation and the soil profile was relatively wet. I want to see what happened between, you know, November 1st from last year and now. So I need to take a look at the water balance. I already have 4 inches back in, you know, late October, early November. I want to look at how much rainfall we had since that time, like let's say from November 1st until like yesterday. And then I want to take a look at actual evapotranspiration. Daniele mentioned how you can, you know, use CEMIS station or spatial CEMIS to come up with ETO. Keep in mind, ETO is the amount of water used by unstressed cool season grass. So we need to determine how much of that is used by our crop using crop coefficient. So I need to have a location to determine, you know, the evapotranspiration, reference evapotranspiration and rainfall. And this is, you know, one of the CEMIS station close to Hanford, CEMIS station number 15. So I'm using this one as an example here. So if I go to CEMIS station number 15, I look at the precipitation from November 1st until yesterday. It's about, you know, 3 inches, 2.8 inches. That's how much rainfall we got. And as you can see, this is a relatively below normal year or dry year. I look at the ETO between November 1st and March 15. So I get here about, you know, 10.7 inches. And keep in mind, this is the amount of water used by unstressed cool season grass. Now, the actual ET for my field, it could be anywhere from 30% to 50%. So a good estimate to start with, I would use 40%, but this depends on so many factors. But like, let's assume that we're going to use 40%. So the actual evapotranspiration on my farm from November 1st until yesterday, I can estimate 40% of the 10.7, and I end up with about 4.3 inches. So I can do a water balance. I start with 4 inches back in November 1st. I can determine how much precipitation, and, you know, since we have relatively small amount here, I'm assuming 100% of that precipitation is going into my soil zone, and then determine how much actual evapotranspiration. And as I mentioned earlier, 40% crop coefficient would be a good estimate. You could go and do it on a monthly basis, but this is just a rough calculations. So I can do the water balance, and I can determine, well, around this time of the year for this soil type, and for the crop I have right now, I have about 2.5 inches of water available. So this is how much available right now. So I need to plan irrigating soon. You know, I could use more accurate estimates of actual evapotranspiration. And if it is 50% of ETO, I only have about 1.4 inches of water left in the soil profile. And later on, we're going to show an example how we can use this information to do irrigation scheduling. So basically, if I have about 1.4 inches, that's not very much. That may be available right now for about maybe 10 days, 2 weeks at most with this kind of weather. So if the water balance is green, it's okay. If it is negative, you need to irrigate immediately. You need to check soil moisture. This is all based on calculations and estimate. The next step is to check soil moisture. And the minimum you can do is go with a shovel and just take a look at the soil moisture in the field. For lighter soils, you know, if we do the calculation, keep in mind, like for example, sandy loam, we only have about 1.2 inches of water available per foot. So the time to irrigate could be just right now, or maybe I'll be stressed even if I have a sandy loam soil, even for the same location. Crop maturity will make a big difference. If you remember in the calculation, we use the effective root zone. I assume that I have a 4-foot effective root zone. If I have relatively new trees and I'm using drip irrigation, there is no way I have 8 foot of roots in the soil profile, or not even 4 feet. So when I look at relatively new trees, I may have to use a root zone of about 2 or 3 feet. Keep in mind, all of the above are estimates. The next step should be checking soil moisture in the field. This is an example of measuring soil moisture using watermark. It's basically like tensiometers. So in this example here, I have sensors at the 4 foot, the first foot, second foot, third foot, and fourth foot. And keep in mind, when we're dealing with micro irrigation systems, drip irrigation, we're dealing basically with the top 2 to 3 feet of the soil profile. In this example, you know, I'm looking at the readings and the guidelines that Daniele mentioned earlier. So in the first foot, I have about 33 centibar, which is relatively good. The ground is wet. 38 is good. 46, I'm getting to the dry. And when I get to about, 80, 90 centibar or 100, that's basically, getting to the stress situation. There are commercial vendors available that can give you an idea about the stress in the field. And this is one of the example from one of the commercial almond fields that we have in Hanford area. You could see different times of the year. This is April. You could see the red, it's indication of stress, red and yellow indication of stress. And, as we go through the season and we apply irrigation, we're getting into more the green and the blue, that showing that we don't have stress. So this is another factor if you subscribe to commercial services. Daniele mentioned Thule. Actually, we use Thule on almond and many other crops, and they provide similar service. Actually, if you have a Thule system, you'll get a weekly email, and they will tell you, how much moisture available at your location. They'll say, okay, right now you have 2 inches of moisture available. Other considerations, like we mentioned earlier, not common. If I have flood irrigation during the winter time, because I have water available from the irrigation district and I want to do leaching, most likely if you've done this in January or February, the soil profile is wet and you can delay irrigation. You can do the calculations and you can check the soil moisture profile, and you may be able to delay the irrigation until late April or maybe even early May. If one of the above, if you have groundwater recharge or flooding during winter time, you can delay irrigation. There is a lot of work done about delaying irrigation in Walnut, and Ken Shackle and Alan Fulton done a lot of work in this area. And I've been to these fields in Northern California in Corning area, and they can delay irrigation on Walnut for like until May without an impact on crop yield. For Almond, I think Ken Shackle done the work on relatively just I think a year or two. So there's still more work needed to be done in this area. With this, I'm going to stop here, and we will have toward the end we'll have a session showing an example of how we do irrigation scheduling, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties there. So, in order to think about this from think about irrigation, managing irrigation from a plant-based perspective, we need to understand the relationship that that the plant has with water and its ability to assimilate CO2, and that's needed for plant growth and photosynthesis and plant growth. And so the stomata on a plant are these tiny pore openings in the plant tissue that open and close to enable carbon dioxide gas exchange between the plant and the atmosphere. And so the greater the stomatal conductance, which you can see along the x-axis, is increasing as you go to the right. So the greater your stomatal conductance, the greater those stomates are opening, and the greater level of CO2 assimilation that the plant can achieve. And then this stomatal opening is dependent on the level of turgor in the stomates, and that's in response to the plant water status of the overall tree. So next slide. So when plants when trees come under stress, they reduce their transpiration rates as the soil moisture decreases, and so in order to maintain that turgor, they begin closing their stomatal conductance. So the stomatal conductance decreases as plant water stress increases. Okay, so when we have reduced water or we apply deficit irrigation, the turgor pressure goes down in those stomates, and it decreases the availability of the plant to uptake carbon dioxide, and thereby reducing photosynthesis and reducing vegetative growth. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Oh, sorry. Go back one. Okay. So when we think about this plant water status that I've been talking about, it's not a static thing in the tree. It changes. And when we have the greatest level of water potential in the soil, so that means that we have the lowest amount of negative pressure in the soil, and then water wants to follow a gradient from areas of high potential to areas of low water potential. And so this gradient and water potential provides this tremendous driving force of water movement through the tree, which drives transpiration. And so when we're using plant-based methods of understanding plant water stress, we're most interested in the level of stress that's occurring in the xylem in the trunk. Okay, so the centermost part of the tree here. And so I'm going to be referring to this 7.5 bars a couple times, because we tend to think of that with almonds as being sort of in that area of adequate adequate water status. So that's can be the target under many conditions. Okay, next slide. And so UC has done research in multiple different tree crops and has produced some publications to help you understand how to integrate these methods into your orchard practice. And so we really kind of promote this practice as a way to quantify how an orchard is responding to your soil, water, irrigation management, and it can help confirm and adjust assumptions that you're making about how well your irrigation is making, or how well your irrigation is accomplishing achieving that desired plant water status. And so we want to use these methods in conjunction with the soil moisture depletion methods that both Daniele and Khaled have been discussing. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there's various styles and manufacturers of what we call pressure chambers. Okay, so pressure chambers are instruments that can be used in the field to measure the magnitude of that pulling force that I was talking about, that the plant is using to extract water from the soil to pull the water into its leaves. Okay. So there's a variety of things available. This one on the far left has a pumping mechanism. So you actually use it like a bike pump to add pressure to the chamber. And I'll explain to you what's happening in the next couple slides. You could also use what we have, the PMS pressure chamber that's in that center blue box. That's a very big, heavy instrument, but it works very well, you know, on the back of your pickup truck. If you want to walk into the orchard, sample leaves, and return to the truck. And the same with the other two other two instruments that you see there. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, plant pressure chamber is used to measure the level of tension in a leaf. And the values that we're going to get on a pressure gauge are normally expressed as a negative value, since you're measuring the tension in the xylem. And the way that this is done is by bagging leaves in the orchard at midday to determine that midday stem water potential, so that the time of the day when the tree is thought to be under the most stress from heat and transpiration. Next slide. So where should you measure your midday stem water potential? Well, we want to keep in mind some of those principles that Khaled was mentioning with thinking about variability in the field. So if you understand where the different soil textures, the different water holding capacities of the areas of your orchard, that should give you a sense that that's gonna be a different impact on the trees and the level of stress. And so, you know, becoming familiar with your field, and if you have the ability to make your irrigation system modifications where you can do slightly variable irrigations depending on that, that would be a good option. But anyway, so you want to do a cross section of your field, and maybe not just on the edges that are closest to your truck and where the instrument is. So you may require, you know, a bit of walking around, a bit of careful inventory. You know, you want to try to sample the same trees week to week, you know, to track your own data. Next slide. Okay, so so where to do this in the orchard? So since I mentioned that slide earlier with that continuum from soil to the atmosphere, and I mentioned that we're really focused on what that level of xylem pressure is in the trunk, but we're bagging leaves. And so the leaves, you might remember from that graph I showed, the leaves tend to have a much more negative level of pressure than what we see in the trunk. So what we need to do is equilibrate the leaf pressure with the trunk pressure. And the way that we can do that is by bagging leaves with these mylar bags that, you know, stop transpiration, they stop photosynthesis, and put these bags on the tree and allow the leaf to equilibrate with the trunk for about 15 minutes. Next slide. Okay, so at the end of that 15-minute period, we're going to carefully remove the leaf from the tree. You know, I like to carry some razor blades or a sharp knife to make sure I get a really clean cut of that petiole, and as close to where the petiole joins the stem as possible. You want to try to get as long of a petiole as you can. It makes it easier to work with the chamber. So this little schematic shows that you put that leaf in the Mylar bag, in the pressure chamber, and then you're going to tighten it down. And then usually it comes equipped with a magnifying glass where you can get a nice view of the end of that petiole. And what we're looking for is we're adding gas or to this chamber to increase the amount of pressure on the leaf. And then when and we're doing this very gradually and watching that pressure gauge. And at the moment when the pressure in the leaf is equal to the pressure in the chamber, that's when we see the water begin to exude from the end of the petiole. And so we want to, you know, it takes some practice, but you're gradually applying that pressure, and then you want to stop it. And then you need to look at that number to gauge what that negative stem water potential reading is. Next slide. And so this is a close-up of what you would be looking at through the pressure chamber magnifying glass. And so this is the petiole of the end of petiole of an almond leaf. And you can see some of the vascular tissues there are the that sort of U-shaped or C-shaped lighter colored part. And so we're carefully looking at that. And then on the right side, you see a picture of when water begins to bubble out at the end of the petiole. And so I like to call that point the instant I start to see moisture coming out at the end. I may not even let it get to that bubbling point. And that's what I call my end point. And you'll develop a technique for yourself. You know, I think consistency is really key so that you can track what the response of the trees are to your irrigation practices from week to week. Next slide. Okay, so earlier I mentioned a baseline. So what are we comparing this number that we're achieving to? Okay, so baselines are the level of stress it's the level of pressure that a well-watered tree that is under no stress would be our target. So we're trying to get from whatever level the tree is at, at a slightly stressed rate, hopefully, and get it close within this target rate. And so these target rates.
Never mind.
Sorry, I heard a little feedback there. Okay, sorry, there's just some background noise. All right, so this is a relationship between the air temperature outside and the relative humidity at the site. And so this table provides you with, you see a cross section. So on a day where it's 90 degrees and there's a relative humidity of 20%, that baseline is going to be a minus 8.7. Okay, so that would be the target for a well-watered tree for that day at that temperature. And so to calculate this on your own, maybe you have a weather station on site, a nearby CMIS weather station will give you this information, or some of the weather-based apps will also tell you what the relative humidity is. So you can get a rough calculation of what your target should be based just simply on the temperature and relative humidity you see here. So you can see that as the temperature goes up, we have an increasing increasingly negative baseline of which we're trying to keep the trees close to. And so generally speaking, we want trees to be within the 2-bar range, 2 bars more negative than the baseline. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this graph is just also showing just for your midday, so around between 12, 1 p.m. somewhere in there. That's when trees are going to be under the highest level of stress, and what some of the ranges are. So no stress would be probably somewhere between 9 to 12 bars. In the peak of the summer, some stress is going to be between 12 to 14 bars, and then severe stress is going to be greater than minus 15 bars, or more negative than minus 15 bars. Next slide. Okay, so again, just interpreting your readings in general. It's good to do that baseline calculation on your own, but in general, if you're seeing a negative 6 to 10 bars, you're not stressed. 11 to 14, you're okay, but you're getting some more stress, and then more than 15, we're looking at severe stress. Now, sometimes you may be, if you're using a pressure chamber to do regulated deficit irrigation, you're going to want to achieve some level of stress if you're doing this during hull split. Next slide. Okay, so sort of in summary here, so your stem water potential irrigation decisions for mature trees, you want to allow that stem water potential to drop about 2 to 4 bars below the baseline before irrigating. So if it's been a couple days since you've irrigated, you're using your soil moisture depletion rates, as Daniele and Khaled looked at, and you're kind of wondering, okay, should we pull the trigger today? Should we do it today? Should we do it tomorrow? This is going to be a good tool to figure out, okay, well, I'm still within, I'm only 3 bars below the baseline. Maybe we can put it off till tomorrow. Okay. You want to, with younger trees, you may want to keep it a little bit closer to the baseline to promote growth and not stress them. They're taking up a lot less water. They've got less canopy. And so it's going to be easier to keep those young trees closer to the baseline. And again, okay, so I'm sorry, it's greater than 15 bars is moderately to severely stressed, and 18 bars would be considered severely stressed. I would hope that you wouldn't see these levels unless you're doing an intentional deficit irrigation stress during hull split to reduce the incidence of hull rot. Okay, next slide. Okay, so midday stem water potential integrates how an orchard is responding to soil, water, and climatic conditions. It can help confirm and adjust your assumptions that you're using when you're using that soil moisture depletion method that Khaled was talking about and using a water budget. Some of the cons to this method are that you have to go into the orchard routinely. It's labor intensive. There's limited acreage, obviously, that you can monitor in a day. So I showed that cross section of the field, and I realized that it's not going to be realistic to, spend all day in one field with the instrument. So, you may need to find, 3 or 4 target areas in the orchard that you're checking on quick. Once you get the method down, you can do this and move through the orchard fairly quickly if you're just monitoring a couple trees. And this, but you really want to use a routine observation in the orchard to develop patterns, to understand what the response of the trees are to your irrigation schedules. It's important that this isn't your only tool in the tool chest. We've been talking about a lot of different things today. You want to use stem water potential in combination with a water budget or soil moisture monitoring. And orchard variability. Okay, so that orchard variability can be a challenge, and so stem water potential can help with this, but it's just one additional tool. Okay, so now next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the new automated technologies that are available that that are much easier than going into the field on your own and taking these readings, but it's still a developing technology. So there's a few products that are available in the market. In a nutshell, what the technology does is it uses these micro tensiometer sensors that are embedded into the trunk and they're connected to that vascular tissue to understand the changes in osmotic potential going on in the tree throughout the course of the day. So these come with software and interpretation of what level of stress the trees are under and some recommendations about irrigation timing. Okay, next slide. And then this is just a picture of one of the sensors and sort of what that installation looks like and entails on a tree in your orchard. Next slide. Okay, so another technology that's a little different are plant-based dendrometers. These have been available quite a bit longer, and the basic idea with this is that we're going to track small changes in water stress and trunk growth. The tree goes through these daily cycles of bark shrinking and swelling due to hydration and dehydration, and in response to those changes in temperature and relative humidity, same as what I was explaining for the determining a stem water potential baseline. Next slide. Okay, so this is just showing you a little bit of what some of the output might look like. These are also good indicators of what kind of trunk growth that you're seeing over the course of the season, so you can also track that. So the annual trunk growth for a well-irrigated almond tree might be about 8,000 microns in a growing season, or 1/3 of an inch increase in the radius of the tree. And then some of the irrigation recommendations are based on this maximum daily shrinkage reading, and that MDS is the difference between your daily maximum and your minimum trunk diameter. And so when there's less water in the soil, or there's more demand because of increased heat, there's a greater level of trunk shrink to swell within the day. Next slide. Okay, Ken Shackle from UC Davis has been doing a little bit of work to evaluate some of these sensors in comparison to using the stem water potential using the pressure chamber. And so this graph shows results from a trial comparing those continuous sensors with the pressure chamber. And just to summarize what he has found so far, the two stem water potential sensors, the Fluoripulse and Saturus sensors, they did show a little bit of delay in response to irrigation. Sometimes, they responded within a day, sometimes 2 days. And so that's not clear what kind of limitation that might present for the use. And then, but then those stem water potential sensors were similar in their ability to measure stem water potential across a range, but that range was not as big as what we have with the pressure chamber. So they have a smaller range from which they can measure. But the continuous stem water potential instruments, as well as the dendrometer, they were all found to have a significant correlation to the pressure chamber measured from May to October in a single year. So that's some positive feedback for the use of those sensors. Next slide. And then this is not a tool that would be readily available for grower purposes, but just to explain some of the other research that's going into understanding how to more precisely calculate a baseline within an individual orchard. And so there's these infrared thermometers available to monitor canopy temperature to understand the difference between the air temperature and the temperature of the canopy to give us an idea of what transpiration rates are of the tree. And this technology, as I mentioned, is used to develop more precise baselines for non-water stress trees. So to give us a better, more precise idea of at a given temperature, relative humidity, what is that ideal plant water status. Next slide. Okay, and so this just some pictures showing some of the increasing technology Khaled mentioned, that a lot of this is becoming commercially available, where satellite imagery, drone imagery is being used to kind of give you a field picture of the differences in canopy temperature. And so this may also be another beneficial tool for some of these larger operations to figure out what areas of the field may need more or less attention, a variable irrigation schedule if you have those capabilities. Next slide. Okay, and so that's just some of the same information that these technologies will give you, an understanding of differences in canopy cover, the canopy and soil temperature in the orchard, and then various vegetation indices. Next slide. Okay, and so what these technologies do is they derive evapotranspiration estimations based on surface temperature, reflectance, and vegetation indices to evaluate your irrigation system and scheduling across the orchard. Next slide. Okay, and so in conclusion, stem water potential provides information that's not available from soil-based or remotely sensed data. Stem water potential is measured by bagging a lower canopy leaf at least 15 minutes before sampling. The sample is cut off from the tree and immediately placed in a chamber. The leaf is pressurized until the xylem sap emerges. Next slide. Okay, so that general range for midday stem water potential in almond, if it's 6 to 10 bars and you don't happen to know that day what the baseline is, you probably don't need to irrigate. If we're seeing 11 to 14 bars, the trees are starting to get under mild to moderate stress. It might be good to initiate irrigation the next day, get trees back to near but not at the baseline. We don't want to oversaturate the trees. We don't want to get right to that baseline point, but we want to be probably within that 2 bar range after irrigation. Values more negative than 14 bars, severe stress is likely starting to set in, and it might be impacting the ability of the tree to photosynthesize, to grow, to provide resources to those to that developing crop. Remotely sensed information can provide a good indication of variation across the orchard. So can a Google Earth image, if you just want to look on an annual basis. And then we need to do more work to correlate a lot of this remotely and proximately sensed methods to assessing plant water status in orchard trees. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Miranda, you're on mute. We cannot hear you.
Thank you, Dr. Molly. I'm just, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask in the remaining minutes? I'm going to proceed to the QR codes for those who are wanting credit. You can pop up your cameras and scan these QR codes. This one's on the left is for CCA credit and the one on the right is for CDFA. But does anyone have any questions for our speakers? You can type them in the chat or just unmute yourself. If you're on your cell phone, please click *6 because I have probably muted you.
I have a question.
Mhm.
It's Christine. And when looking at the soil pyramid, it has like clay and sand and silt, but it doesn't have rocks and gravel in it. And I know it has an impact on how the soil drains, but how how do I incorporate that into how much water holding capacity I think my soil has, and organic matter for that, you know, as well?
Yes, this is Khaled. Yeah. The soil texture is basically looking at sand, silt, and clay. So it's anything 2 millimeter in diameter or less. That is part of the soil texture. It doesn't take into the account the gravel. You can consider that in your calculations. I would say if you take the top foot of the soil profile, you can estimate how much gravel you have, and then your available water holding capacity would be definitely impacted. It will be a lot less. In terms of organic matter, if you have anything like, you know, 0.5% of organic matter or more, you could, it will increase the soil water holding capacity. And you can do an estimate. We will be more than happy to go into details with you. We could have a Zoom call for like half an hour, and we can help you on estimating the water holding capacity for a situation like this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're getting a lot of questions about whether the presentations will be available or has this been recorded. Yes, the webinar has been recorded. It will be on the Almond Board's YouTube channel as soon as it has been uploaded. And then the presentations as well, we can get those available to you guys. If you could email fieldoutreach@almondboard.com, we will get those to you as soon as we can.
Thank you all. Very informative seminar. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then also we have a question from Gabrielle. It says, can one of the speakers address how changes in soil organic matter could affect when you start to irrigate or come into the calculations?
May, do you want to take this question? Well, I can give you a quick idea. Soil organic matter is not going to make much big difference unless you have lots of organic matter in the soil profile. But if we're talking about 0.5%, 1%, that's not going to make much difference in the calculation, and it's going to be on the top foot of the soil profile.
Yeah, I would just add to, I agree with Khaled, unless it's a significant increase. For those of you that may have recycled your orchards, you may have noticed large increases in the percentage of soil moisture in the soil, and I would watch that carefully. We're seeing sometimes upwards of 20% greater soil moisture in orchards that have been recycled. So that would be one of those cases that Khaled mentioned where you're really largely increasing that soil organic matter content in the soil.
I would add probably that having a larger amount of soil organic matter will help you also in refining the irrigation frequency, because you might be able to reduce the frequency. By reducing the frequency of irrigation, you can have a deeper irrigation. You can probably slightly reduce the soil evaporation because a number of irrigation events somehow will have an impact, especially in dry years like this and the previous one. You might want to consider to have a reduced number of irrigation, probably deeper. And if you have soil organic matter that can hold more water, that is beneficial in terms of increasing the amount of applied water that goes into consumptive use, beneficial consumptive use, which is basically tree transpiration.
All right. Next question from Gil. What is the best method to determine field capacity?
Well, field capacity is like if you saturate the soil and you wait 2 to 3 days, that's basically the moisture content at field capacity.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
And just kind of to review the continuing education credit, CCA is on the left and CDFA is on the right of the screen. And for CDFA, you just need to open your camera and it will focus around the QR code, and that will take you to the online form to fill out to receive your CDFA credit. And then for CCA credit, you need to make sure you have created an online account at the Certified Crop Advisor organization. And then once you have a certified crop account, then you can go ahead and log into the application and just scan the QR code to receive credit. But if you have any questions on this, feel free to reach out to fieldoutreach@almondboard.com.
Please stop the recording.
I sure can.
Thank you.